Hello, and welcome to This Week Explained, your essential download on the global stories making headlines. We're ready to unpack yet another complex week from around the globe, but before we dive in, just a quick reminder, if you want to get alerted to new episodes as they are released, make sure you're following or subscribed wherever you're listening right now. It's the easiest way to stay updated. And hey, if you're enjoying the show and want to help others discover it, leaving a quick rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really makes a difference. Also, did you know that Spotify allows comments? This is a great way to stay involved with the podcast. Others can view those comments, and now Spotify is allowing others to interact with your comments. This keeps the conversation going long after the episode. But okay, big news for us, because this week we are excited to announce that this show is now sponsored by BetterHelp. Let's pause and take a moment to talk about something very important. Life has its pressures for everyone, and we often carry the immense weight of expectation to never show weakness, to hide our true feelings, and believe that asking for support somehow makes us less of a person. But bottling things up isn't the answer. It can often lead to feeling down, burnout, or unhealthy habits. We want to normalize the idea that it's okay to struggle. Real strength actually comes from opening up about what you're carrying and doing something about it so you can be at your best for yourself and everyone in your life. If you're feeling the weight of the world, or even if things just feel a bit off, I can't stress enough the value of talking to someone. It could be a friend, a loved one, or a therapist. We here at This Week Explained believe that therapy can be incredibly valuable. Whether you've been in therapy personally or not, the broader benefits are clear. It's so helpful for learning positive coping skills, understanding how to set healthy boundaries, and it really empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's important to remember that therapy isn't just for those who have experienced combat or major trauma. It's a tool for anyone looking to improve their mental well-being and navigate life's challenges. That's why we're thrilled that This Week Explained is now sponsored by BetterHelp. With over 35,000 therapists worldwide, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. And it clearly resonates with users, boasting an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars based on over 1.7 million client reviews. It's also incredibly convenient. You can connect with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. And you can even switch therapists at any time if you feel it's not the right fit. And there's something special for our listeners. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp is offering our listeners 10% off their first month. What are you waiting for? Talk it out with BetterHelp. Once again, our listeners get 10% off their first month by going to betterhelp.com/thisweek. That's betterhelp.com/thisweek. Finally, remember that This Week Explained is part of the awesome Leon Media Network. You can discover more great podcasts over at leonmedianetwork.com. All right, let's get to why you're really here, those stories that are shaping our world. This week on the podcast, we're diving deep into the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, plus an urgent warning from U.S. Africa Command. We'll also unpack how China seemingly capitalized on last month's India-Pakistan conflict. As we've done every week since 2022, we're starting our discussion in Ukraine. And frankly, it's no surprise that Russia's current peace overtures seem less about genuine de-escalation and more about narrative control and setting conditions, all while their military operations press on. From what we're seeing, Russian officials are practically dictating terms and timing, almost trying to paint Ukraine as the reluctant party. So, Kerbin, what is your take on this June 2nd meeting, especially with Russia's focus on identifying the, quote, root causes of the war? But I'm guessing we're not going to mention that they did it. They started it. Why are we forgetting this?
Yeah, I mean, this whole part of the narrative, right? But before we get started into that, I do want to mention something, because when this comes out, I'm sure everyone will have seen that Ukraine has done an incredible counteroffensive into Russia through drone strikes on various military sites. And I believe this is, haven't had a chance to dive into that because we're getting set up for the podcast and recording and all of that stuff. But it looks to me like they are trying to push this effort to start this peace deal. So June 2nd in Turkey, trying to get Russia to actually come to the table in good faith. Looks like Ukraine is going to push that pressure onto Russia through these drone strikes. They've hit naval assets, various military assets within Russia. So You'll hear about that next week on the podcast. We might even get a post out on Instagram this week on how effective that counteroffensive was. But I wanted to talk about it just at the top here because when this comes out on Monday, you will probably have already seen all of this news and wonder why we didn't talk about it. It's because we don't like to talk about things unless we've been able to go into a deep dive and actually see what's going on, as opposed to like BBC and CNN who have to get breaking news out and say, look, this is what happened. We don't know why it happened, but here's what happened. That's not what we like to do. So back to what you were talking about, which is the root cause, identifying the root cause of the war, which at Russia, classic Kremlin playbook, they're saying NATO, Ukraine, they're the root cause of this. Now, it was Sergei Lavrov who insisted on discussing these root causes. For Russia, that always circles back to NATO, the NATO expansion, this alleged discrimination against Russian speakers in Ukraine. And what they're trying to do is reframe the discussion of this conflict on their terms. So it's an attempt to shift blame, distract from the ongoing aggression that is Russian aggression. And frankly, the fact that they're sending the same low-level delegation, that proves to me they're not coming to the table for good faith negotiations. They're there to manage perceptions, not to make peace.
And it's not just the terms, it's the location too, right? I mean, Putin initially floated Istanbul, then rejected Zelensky's invitation for an in-person meeting there, and now they're still pushing for Istanbul, even after the U.S. suggested the Vatican. It feels like they're trying to force Ukraine into a specific environment.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So, look, it's NATO's most unreliable member, right? Turkey. But Istanbul also carries a specific historical weight for Russia in these talks. That's tied to the 2022 Istanbul Protocols, where Russia essentially demanded Ukraine's capitulation. Now, by insisting on Istanbul, they're trying to frame any current discussions as a continuation of the past attempts that were made, thereby pushing for those same maximalist demands. It's about leveraging the venue to gain a psychological and diplomatic advantage.
Well, it sounds like a chess game where one side is moving all the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess not really a game. It's not really a game because that implies there's more than one player that are controlling the pieces, you know? And, you know, speaking of pieces, it seems like the U.S. has made some significant concessions, particularly regarding NATO's eastward expansion, which Russia views as a root cause, of course. Yet Russia is pocketing these and still making more demands. So how does that fit in with your analytical mind?
Yeah, look, it's incredibly frustrating to watch because, you know, from a diplomatic and intelligence perspective, when you make a concession in a negotiation, you expect a reciprocal move. And I think that's why Trump is getting very angry at Putin right now, because that's sort of a business discussion, right? When you're having business negotiations, when you make a concession, you're wanting the other person to also make concessions. But Russia's not playing that game. So these comments about the U.S. understanding Putin's concerns on NATO, that's a clear sign that they see this as a win for them. Russia sees this as a win in their regard. It's not a basis for compromise. They're effectively gaining ground on their desired post-war security posture, which is a veto over NATO's open door policy without giving anything in return. Now, we're seeing them demand an end to Western military aid and Ukrainian mobilization as prerequisites for a ceasefire, which is, I'm going to say this, that's a non-starter for Kyiv.
So they're pushing for a ceasefire on their terms, which would essentially freeze the conflict in place and allow them to consolidate their gains while also disarming Ukraine. Come on now. They don't have to do anything, they think.
Yeah.
They must think they have all the leverage, right?
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. They do. And we'll see how it works out for them, right? It aligns with our prior assessments that Russia is deliberately protracting these negotiations. So the absence of concrete deadlines for the peace process, that benefits Russia. It allows them to continue offensive operations like the recent advances we've seen, and then use those battlefield gains to extract even more concessions from Ukraine and Western Europe. They're effectively saying, we'll keep fighting until you accept our terms or until Russia can't fight anymore.
Shifting gears slightly, but still on the topic of international support, there's been some concerning news about China's role. Western reports indicate that China is increasing drone deliveries to Russia while reducing sales to Ukraine and Western buyers. So, what does this tell us about China's true stance in the conflict?
Look, it says the same thing that we've said from the very beginning. This is a very clear demonstration of China's support for Russia's war effort. Now, Zelensky did make a statement about these DJI Mavic drones that Russia's using. There were Chinese representatives even at Russian production facilities. It's very telling in the international community. It's not just about turning a blind eye. They are actively complicit in this war. And we've been tracking reports of Chinese-made equipment with Russian forces and even joint production lines for those Shahed-like drones. This isn't neutral. China is not being neutral. This is direct material support that fuels the Kremlin's war machine.
And on the flip side of that coin, Ukraine is also making significant strides in its own defense technology. The announcement about Ukraine fielding a long-range drone with sophisticated AI sounds like a game changer. So what are the implications of this new technology?
Yeah, this is huge. This is a really big deal. And you're talking about the Gogol-M. It's a serious advancement. Its ability to act as a mothership for these first-person view drones, or FPV drones, with automated target acquisition. It's got a 300-kilometer range, and it's independent of GPS. That's because of its AI-powered smart pilot system. That makes it highly resistant to electronic warfare. This gives Ukrainian forces a critical edge in surveillance and strike capabilities. This is especially against Russian military targets. It could significantly impact their operational reach and their precision.
So while Russia tries to control the diplomatic narrative, Ukraine is innovating on the battlefield. So it paints a picture of a very complex and evolving conflict, both militarily and diplomatically. And with these proposed sanctions from the U.S. Senate, it seems like the West is also preparing to escalate its pressure on Russia and its allies. I mean, it seems that way.
It does. And look, this conflict is multi-layered. We have Russia trying to leverage diplomatic talks for strategic gain while also continuing their own military aggression. We've got the West, and I'm particularly talking about the United States here. They are responding with increased sanctions and military support for Ukraine because Putin isn't being what they thought he would be. That's coming from the Trump administration. And then the last layer there's Ukraine. Despite facing immense pressure, Ukraine is pushing forward with technological advancements that actually could change warfare in the future globally.
Well, thank you so much for that update on the war in Ukraine. For now, we need to shift our focus to the ongoing efforts for a ceasefire in Gaza. We should obviously start with the latest developments. We've been hearing a lot about this new U.S.-backed proposal, so can you walk us through what we know about it?
Well, look, what's clear is that the U.S. has put forward a new proposal aimed at brokering a ceasefire and hostage release. The White House has been quite firm on one point. Israel actually signed off on this plan before it was even sent to Hamas. Now, this was confirmed to be a direct result of discussions between U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer. Now, the Americans are essentially telling Hamas, quote, "We've got Israel's buy-in. Now we're waiting on you, Hamas," end quote.
So Israel's on board, at least officially, with what the U.S. has proposed. And even Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly told hostage families he accepted it, despite his office later muddying the waters a bit about how that information even got out. But what exactly is in this proposal, at least according to the leaks that we've seen, that would entice both sides?
Well, we can only say what is being released in the media. So from what Israeli media has reported, citing their officials within the Israeli government, the proposal involves a phased exchange. Now, Hamas would release 10 living hostages and the bodies of 18 deceased hostages in 2 phases. In return, there would be a 60-day ceasefire and the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. So the idea is to get those initial hostages out and provide a substantial pause in the fighting.
I mean, this sounds like a significant step, especially with the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. We're talking about almost 4,000 people killed in the last 10 weeks, 600,000 displaced, and reports of 500,000 facing catastrophic hunger. A 60-day ceasefire could provide much-needed relief, but, and this is a big but, Hamas has reportedly rejected it. I've seen several articles saying that they are not backing this at all. There is now talk of a partial acceptance. So what is going on here? Like what is their hang up?
Yeah, right. It just seems like conflicting reports all over the place. And this is where things have been changing daily, if not hourly. Hamas has responded to the U.S. ceasefire proposal, and it's your favorite word, Tiana, nuanced. So we've got a not a direct acceptance, but we also don't have an outright rejection. That is key. They haven't walked away from the table. So Hamas has stated that they are prepared to release 10 living Israeli hostages and 18 dead hostages in exchange for what they called, quote, an agreed-upon number of Palestinian prisoners. But they've also requested some significant amendments to the plan.
Amendments? That sounds like a negotiation in motion, but what are these key amendments that they're pushing for?
Yeah, their repeated demands remain for a permanent truce. They also want a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and guarantees for the continuous flow of humanitarian aid. Now, critically, none of these are explicitly in the deal currently on the table. With one Hamas official that told news outlets that there was a prior understanding with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff on a proposal that was acceptable for negotiation. But the Israeli response to that original understanding brought forth this new text that was put out that went away from what Hamas said they had agreed to. Now, that Hamas individual accused the mediation process of being completely biased towards Israel.
I mean, can you blame him? Look at who is mediating the negotiations. Okay, so back to the facts of the matter. You are saying that even though the White House and Israel publicly stated Israel signed off on this U.S.-backed plan, Hamas is essentially saying, not so fast. This isn't what we discussed, and it doesn't meet our fundamental requirements. And what has the U.S. and Israel's reaction been to this non-rejection, non-acceptance response from Hamas?
Look, they were immediate and blunt, Tiana. Witkoff issued a statement. He said, I want to quote him here, I received the Hamas response to the United States proposal. It is totally unacceptable and only takes us backward, end quote, from Steve Witkoff. He urged Hamas to accept the framework as the basis for proximity talks. He suggested that those could start this week, actually, so we could see some stuff coming out this week. Now, similarly, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office echoed the sentiment from Steve Witkoff. They said, and once again, I want to quote them here, quote, while Israel has agreed to the updated Witkoff outline for the release of our hostages, Hamas continues to adhere to its refusal, end quote. Now, Defense Minister Israel Katz even went so far as to say Hamas must either accept the terms of the Witkoff deal or be annihilated.
Quote, totally unacceptable, end quote, and quote, only takes us backward, end quote. That sounds like a very strong pushback, especially coming from the U.S. envoy. But you have mentioned over the last few weeks that Hamas is in a really complex and difficult position right now. Like they can't accept it easily due to internal pressure and past rejections of less favorable terms. So what's the other side of this? Like, why can't they just outright reject it?
Well, because the alternative is it's even worse for them. Hamas is acutely aware that Israel is preparing to escalate its ground offensive in Gaza. And this is a crucial analytical point that I want to make. The Hamas movement simply lacks the military capacity to prevent or even seriously resist such an assault. They've been significantly degraded since the war began. So an outright rejection, that could invite an even more devastating Israeli operation that would lead to further loss of life and then greater destruction. And all of that without any tangible gains for their stated objective.
Okay, that does make a lot of sense. It appears to me that Hamas is kind of trapped, you know? They can't fully accept and they can't fully reject it. And you said their response is effectively a counterproposal. So what does that mean for the original U.S. plan, which included a 60-day pause, release of hostages, a release of over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, and the free flow of humanitarian aid?
Yo, look,
because that sounds like pretty good terms to me.
Yeah, you would think so. And look, never having not been in these diplomatic discussions, sitting side by side with enemy forces, we just don't know how all of these come about.
I mean, they don't trust each other, so I mean, there's that
Yes.
playing into it as well.
Yeah, we try not
And
to bring it up every
obviously-
week, but
Yeah, we don't want to bring it up every time, but and also Israel goes back on their word kind of frequently as well. So I mean, just
yeah, it's two people.
saying.
It's two groups, not even just two groups, but it's groups that just don't have, like you said, they don't have trust for each other, first of all. And without a lack of trust, you can't have good faith discussions. But to answer your question on, what all of this means, it means that they've taken the U.S. proposal. Hamas has taken it. They've attempted to modify it to meet their essential demands. They're offering the 10 living and 18 dead hostages for that agreed upon number of Palestinian prisoners. I think we're going to get to about 1,000 at the end of this. But crucially, they want to ensure that this leads to a permanent ceasefire, full with Israeli withdrawal, and guaranteed continuous aid flow. That is what they're slapping their fist or slapping their hands on the table. That's what they want. Now, the U.S. proposal, it does provide a 60-day pause, but it doesn't guarantee the permanence of the ceasefire. It also doesn't guarantee an immediate and unconditional flow of that humanitarian aid that is so desperately needed. Now, the original U.S. plan, that was designed with Israel's red lines in mind, because Israel is a U.S. ally. So, if any of that is taken off the table, it makes it unlikely Netanyahu is going to be willing to negotiate the changes that Hamas wants, especially since Israel insists on its right to resume hostilities and aims to dismantle Hamas.
So we have the U.S. and Israel saying Hamas's response is unacceptable, and Hamas arguing that the U.S. proposal itself changed and is biased. Well, once again, it feels like we are in a stalemate with immense suffering on the ground continuing, but at least no one has to, no one's putting their pride aside, that their pride's intact because no one is thinking about the civilians. But given all this, Kervin, what do you see as the most likely next steps in this agonizing situation?
Well, I think we're going to see the mediators continue to work with both sides and try to build these fundamental gaps. Now, right now, the pressure is on Hamas to make some concessions. That pressure is immense. But look, we see it in the media every single day. The pressure is also on Israel because of the humanitarian situation and the Israeli hostages that the Israeli families want back. This counterproposal from Hamas, now, it is deemed unacceptable by Witkoff, but that doesn't mean the door is slammed shut. Nobody walked out and said we're not negotiating anymore. It's a statement of Hamas's minimum conditions under extreme duress. We're likely going to see continued diplomatic efforts. I think there's going to be some subtle adjustments to the terms. Sort of see the mediators try to find that elusive sweet spot for both sides. But I think each side's kind of going to be reluctant to agree to it until we can find something that both sides can go back and say, we won in these negotiations. Now, like I've said, this has, at certain points, changed either daily or hourly. So I think this week, this is an important week of discussions. We're probably not going to get to an agreement, but we can get to a framework of an agreement within the next week.
So not a completely grim outlook for the immediate future. Still, you have given us a lot to process. So thank you so much for breaking it down as always. We'll continue tracking this war, but for now, let's shift our focus to some pretty alarming warnings coming out of the U.S.-Africa Command. But before we dive in, we need to take a quick break for a message from our sponsors. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, listeners. As we hinted at before the break, this week we've been seeing some pretty alarming warnings coming out of the U.S. Africa Command, which is AFRICOM, because you know how we love our acronyms over here.
Yep.
General Michael Langley, the head of AFRICOM, just made a really stark statement about the Sahel region in Africa. All right, Kervin, lay it on us. What's he saying, and why is it so concerning?
Look, General Langley did not mince words here, and he's honestly known around the command for being quite frank with everyone. He unequivocally stated that the Sahel region is now the, quote, epicenter of terrorism on the globe, end quote. What do you know? Another prediction from this podcast turning out to be Nostradamus-like. I know you remember, Tiana. We've discussed how giving the Sahel to Russia and China, that's going to cause it to become a hotbed of terror activity. Now, we've got General Langley, head of Africa Command. He's seeing terror factions dramatically increasing their presence and critically their capabilities over the past 3 years. Now, the most worrying part for all of us here in the United States is his assessment that they're ramping up their ability to launch attacks inside the U.S. homeland.
Look at us go, Kervin.
We're like 100 for 100, Tiana.
It's like we're good at this.
Yeah.
Reading people. We're really good at reading people from all like environments and worldviews, and so we can figure out what their angle is going to be.
Yeah, because when you don't take someone at their word and see what they're actually doing and their past actions, you can pretty much formulate what they're going to do in the future.
Pattern recognition, almost.
There you go. We're all data analysts.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not, but I like to pretend.
But you are.
So the epicenter of terrorism on the globe. That phrase really makes you want to sit up and pay attention. And when you say the Sahel, for our listeners who might not be immediately familiar, which countries are we primarily talking about here?
That's a great question, because a lot of times I just say stuff thinking everyone's already got a broad view of all this. So let's start there. The Western Sahel encompasses countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Niger, Chad. These are countries that have seen significant instability. They've seen, very famously, coups that we've been part of, and this also growing presence of extremist groups for some time now.
So all countries that you've been to,
yes.
Basically.
It's not my fault.
So, well, you went where they told you to go, I guess.
No, I always try to caveat that, because I'm like, I was here and here and here, and I was like, it's not my fault. They got worse after I left.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean now. I thought you were saying it wasn't your fault you went to Africa to begin with.
Oh, okay. No.
But I'm like, you knew where you were going to be sent, though. So
I'm saying the current situation is not my fault.
Yes. And it has denigrated so much since you've left Kervin. You need to go back out there, I think. They're just missing some curve. I'm just kidding. It's not that simple, obviously. But anyways, speaking of extremist groups, Langley singled out one in particular, an Al-Qaeda aligned faction known as JNIM. So what's so significant about this group, and why is Langley so concerned about them?
Yeah, so you were talking about Jamaat Nasr al-Islam wal-Muslimin, that's JNIM, that is loosely translated as the Group for the Support of Islam and Muslims. It's not loosely translated. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's directly translated as the Group for the Support of Islam and Muslims. Now, they are a major concern because, much like ISIS in 2014, this group has rapidly expanded. General Langley stated that they've expanded fourfold since just 2022. And think about that for a second. A terrorist group growing that fast in just a couple of years, and the impact. They now control much of Burkina Faso. When you have a group like that, with that kind of reach and control over territory, their operational capabilities and their ambitions inevitably grow. Now, General Langley specifically warned that I want to quote him here. This is, quote, they could have the capacity to attack the U.S. homeland, end quote. That's not a statement made lightly. General Langley does not do that. He's very cautious about the terms that he uses and the statements that he makes. And what's complicating matters significantly is the shifting geopolitical landscape in Africa.
Right. The elephant in the room, or in this case, the dragon in the bear. As you alluded to with our predictions, we are now seeing Russia and China making significant inroads on the continent. So how's their increased investment and influence impacting the U.S.'s counterterrorism efforts and the overall stability in the Sahel?
Look, it's a huge factor, Tiana. While the U.S. has been grappling with domestic issues and, frankly, pulling back from some engagements, China and Russia have been investing heavily and forging alliances with local governments. Let's look at something we discussed last year with Niger. The U.S. had a crucial presence there. Millions were spent on a hub for counterterrorism operations, but after a governing militia asked the U.S. to leave, they welcomed Russian troops instead. That's a direct blow to the U.S. ability to conduct intelligence gathering and also to conduct operations in such a crucial area.
So not only are these extremist groups gaining ground and capability, but the U.S. is also losing its strategic footholds and influence in the region. Sounds like a perfect storm.
Yeah, it is. And it's a stark illustration of how interconnected these geopolitical challenges are. When extremist groups gain ground and expand their ambitions, and simultaneously the U.S. is sidelined in favor of other global powers, it directly impacts our ability to protect our own homeland. Now, General Langley's core message was precisely that. He said, quote, "Extremist groups are gaining ground and also expanding their ambitions. Therein lies the threat to the homeland as they gain in capability and capacity," end quote. This is a complex, multi-layered problem. It requires a sophisticated and sustained response, something that feels like it's been lacking for a few years now. Now, the current stated goal of the governments of both China and Russia, the dragon and the bear that you alluded to, that's to make the United States weaker. One way to do this is to allow for the free flow of violent extremists from the Western Sahel into Europe. Then from there, they're free to hop on a flight and they can go to the U.S. and do damage.
It's like they think terrorists won't eventually infiltrate their countries. Like, what?
Yeah, well, but when you project the United States as the great evil, then those extremist groups are going to want to go just to the U.S. But I get exactly what you're saying. 10 years from now, let's say it works out for China and Russia, who have been, very publicly pretty evil to Muslim people within their countries. We saw ISIS-K kind of attack Russia, right? We're seeing what's happening with Muslims in China. Who's to say in 10 years that Russia and China aren't seen as the great Satan, the great evils, and then they're starting to be attacked. So something that they should listen to Tiana here. Those countries should start listening to her, try to find some common ground with the United States because it could be coming for you.
And obviously that's a tough reality to sit with, especially knowing the sacrifices that so many have made in the fight against terrorism. And speaking of tough realities, let's shift our focus to the recent flare-up between India and Pakistan. For those just catching up, we saw a 4-day conflict unfold between India and Pakistan in May, and it sparked a brutal terror attack in India. India launched strikes, codenamed Operation Sindoor, and then it turned into a tit-for-tat situation with drones, missiles, and fighter jets. But what really caught my eye, Kervin, was Beijing's notable silence on the performance of its weapons.
Yeah, I mean, they're silent, or their spokesperson's carefully worded non-comment. That was quite telling, I think. So when asked about Pakistan using Chinese weapons and India finding an unexploded Chinese missile, China's defense ministry spokesman just didn't really say anything. He avoided talking about how well the weapons performed. He just said the missile was an export item that had been shown publicly before. Now, basically, he was being very careful with his words. He was trying not to get directly involved in the conversation, but his silence and vague answers seemed to suggest there's more to this story. It was like they were trying to hint at something important, but they didn't want to actually say it out loud.
You know, as a wife and a mother, that kind of evasiveness always raises my antenna. It's kind of like whenever I'm trying to get a straight answer out of you or the kids about who finished the last of the ice cream when all I wanted was a dang Coke float, because I am actually a 70-year-old person who enjoys going to soda shops and loves putting ice cream in my sodas and chocolate malts and milkshakes and all that stuff. I love soda shop things. But anyways, you guys never give me a straight answer on who ate the last of the ice cream, and I'm left hanging. I don't have ice cream for my soda, and it's really rude. But I need to bring it back. On a more serious note, India has claimed that China provided air defense and satellite support to Pakistan, and that their weapon systems performed below average. Is there any truth to these assertions, or is it just the usual geopolitical mudslinging?
Oh, well, that's a great question, and I didn't eat the ice cream. I promise you, for that other question that you were asking. Look, given what's called the all-weather ties between China and Pakistan. And the sheer volume of Chinese weapons Pakistan procures, like 80% of their arms procurement from 2020 to 2024, that comes from China. And it would be naive to think there wasn't a significant level of cooperation between the two. From the J-17 aircraft, which they co-produced, to naval ships, submarines, missiles, China's Pakistan's go-to supplier. So whether it was direct air defense or satellite support, the deeper strategic alignment is undeniable.
I mean, that makes sense. A weak Pakistan isn't in China's best interest, especially with all that investment in the China-Pakistan economic corridor. But let's get to the juicy bits of the aerial skirmishes. Like, India reportedly used its French and Russian-made jets, while Pakistan deployed their J-10s and 17s. And then Pakistan claimed to have shot down at least 6 Indian planes, and India's response was quite vague, saying, quote, "losses are a part of combat," end quote. So what do you make of all of this from your analytical perspective?
Look, right now we are all in an information vacuum. Both sides have claimed victory, but there's this lack of definitive, independently verified account of this particular event. India says they killed 100 terrorists. They targeted Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed headquarters. Pakistan, on the other hand, they're pushing this narrative of downing those Indian jets. Now, the fact that Beijing hasn't commented on the J-10 specifically taking down that jet, that's interesting to me. But that has not stopped the jubilation on Chinese social media. Internally, it appears that at the moment, perception matters way more than the reality.
So you're saying that regardless of the actual combat performance, the perception of Chinese weapons doing well in a real combat situation is a huge win for Beijing.
Yeah, absolutely. This was, as some experts have called it, a, quote, deep seek moment, end quote. And that's for the Chinese, this is all for the Chinese weapon industry, and it's referring to that Chinese AI startup that rattled U.S. giants because of this cost-effective tech that they stole from the United States and incorporated into their own AI company. We had one retired senior colonel from the PLA even told the BBC that this aerial fight was a, quote, big advertisement, end quote, for the Chinese weapon industry. Claimed it showed, quote, China has some systems that are next to none, end quote. When this all happened, shares in the Chinese Avic Chengdu aircraft company, they make the J-10. They surged by up to 40% after those reports happened. And that was even though no one confirmed that this even happened. This is a testament to the fact that sometimes perception can be reality.
That's incredible. But playing devil's advocate here, there are always dissenting voices. Like, some within the international community say it's too early to declare Chinese weapons superior. Some suggest India's mission might not have been to provoke retaliation, but rather to achieve specific ground targets. And let's not forget past reports of technical malfunctions with Chinese-made jets in Myanmar and Nigeria. Would you agree that sometimes the reality on the ground is far messier than the headlines suggest?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it play out in real time personally, and it's a crucial point that you bring up, Tiana. The argument here about India's mission intent is very significant. If the objective wasn't to engage in a prolonged dogfight, but rather to strike targets and then disengage and leave, then the narrative of Chinese jets outmaneuvering those Indian jets becomes a little more nuanced. India did, after all, report hitting an impressive breadth of targets across Pakistan, including sensitive air bases, which seems to have gone largely unnoticed. They claim to have used an array of missiles and drones against Pakistani air defenses, and that suggests a level of sophistication and effectiveness on the Indian side as well.
So, despite all the fanfare around the J-10, India was still able to achieve its objectives, albeit with a different strategy. I mean, it sounds like India's military, by not getting into the nitty-gritty of the mission, might have lost control of the narrative.
Yeah, like in today's world of instant information and social media, how something is perceived can often be more important than the actual truth. Let's bring it to a U.S. perspective from the business side. Think about the company Theranos. For years, it was a failing company. but its carefully controlled image convinced many it was a groundbreaking unicorn of a company. China understands this very well. The perceived success of their J-10 fighter jet in real-world combat is a powerful marketing tool for their weapons, especially as they aim to become an even bigger player in global arms exports. They're already the fourth largest exporter worldwide. Now, that's largely selling to developing nations, but they are keen to catch up to the United States. Now, even if the full details of the J-10's performance remain unclear, this kind of combat exposure provides incredibly valuable information for China. It helps them improve their weapons for a future large-scale combat operation and, perhaps more importantly, reinforces a narrative of success that boosts those arms sales.
And what does this mean for India beyond the immediate conflict? It feels like a wake-up call for them, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Look, remember, India is part of BRICS. China is one of their allies, but it's also a supplier to their enemies. India is acutely aware of the advancements China is making. We're talking about the J-20 stealth fighter jets, other sorts of weapons, satellite, intelligence. Now, given their long-standing border disputes with China, this conflict with Pakistan underscores the urgent need for India to accelerate investments in its homegrown defense manufacturing, their own military, and to continue to modernize that military through international acquisitions. They need to ensure they can counter these perceived advancements from China.
So in essence, while the India-Pakistan conflict was localized, its ripples are being felt globally, particularly in the arms trade and the ongoing geopolitical competition between major powers.
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it there, Tiana. You're absolutely right.
Thank you so much for breaking this down for us. Another week of drama.
Of drama.
So is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I mean, unless we have some fun things we can talk about. Okay. And that's where the world is today.
Okay, well, thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope you found it both informative and engaging. And if you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. For more in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.